May 1st, 1943. High above the grey waters of the English Channel, a B-17 flying fortress is dying. Flames claw through the fuselage. The radio room is already gone, swallowed by a roaring furnace of burning insulation, ruptured fuel, and exploding ammunition. Every few seconds another round cooks off, ricocheting through the metal body like a steel hornet. 3 men have jumped, 2 more are bleeding where they fell, and in the middle of the aircraft, framed by smoke and fire, stands the one man nobody wanted beside them in the first place. Staff Sergeant Maynard Harrison Smith, Snuffy. He has been in England barely 6 weeks. This is his first combat mission. Up front, the pilots are cut off, trapped behind a wall of flame. They have no idea who is alive back in the fuselage. The gunners who could help are gone, dead, wounded, or drifting somewhere far below in the cold channel. German fighters still circle. The bomber is losing altitude, and Snuffy Smith is alone. Alone in a burning airplane. Alone with ruptured fuel tanks. Alone with ammunition detonating around him. Alone with men who will die if he fails. What happens in the next hour and a half will enter the history of aerial warfare. It will earn this difficult, unpopular, stubborn airman the Medal of Honor, the first enlisted flyer in the war to receive it. But if you had walked onto the base 2 months later, on the day the Secretary of War arrived to pin that medal on his chest, you wouldn't have found a conquering hero. You would have found Snuffy in the kitchen, peeling potatoes, punishment for being late, because heroism and personality are not the same thing. And the man who would save an airplane was in almost every other moment of his life the man nobody could stand. This is the story of Maynard Snuffy Smith. Long before the fire, before the fighters, before the legend, Maynard Harrison Smith was already well known for something else: trouble. He was born on May 19th, 1911 in the quiet farming town of Cairo, Michigan. His father was a respected attorney, his mother a schoolteacher. By local standards the Smith family did very well, and young Maynard grew up knowing he stood a little higher than most of the people around him. That knowledge shaped him. From boyhood he carried himself with a certainty that rules were flexible things, especially when they applied to him. Teachers saw defiance, neighbors saw arrogance. Authority figures saw a young man who always seemed to be testing how far he could push before something pushed back. His parents worried. Discipline, they believed, might sand down the sharp edges, so they sent him away. Indiana, a military academy, boarding school, uniforms, inspections, early mornings, the full machinery designed to turn rebellious boys into responsible men. Maynard survived it, he even graduated, but the transformation everyone hoped for never came. If anything, he simply learned how to endure authority without ever truly accepting it. Adulthood brought no direction. He drifted from job to job, the Treasury Department, the Michigan Banking Commission, positions that required steadiness and humility, traits that did not come naturally to him. Supervisors found him difficult, co-workers found him exhausting. Nothing lasted. In 1929 he married, perhaps hoping stability might grow where discipline had failed. By 1932 the marriage was over. 2 years later his father died, and Maynard inherited enough money to postpone the consequences of his own behavior. So he stepped away from responsibility entirely. No career, no long-term plans, just a man in his 30s living on yesterday's success and convinced tomorrow would somehow arrange itself. For a while it worked. Then the inheritance began to thin. Bills arrived, obligations followed, and the reputation he had spent a lifetime building, the smart, superior man who answered to no one, began to collide with reality. By the early 1940s, reality was winning. A court was about to force a decision that comfort, charm, and family money could no longer avoid. And for the first time in his life, Maynard Smith was going to discover that the world could choose for him. By 1942, Maynard Smith had reached the end of the road he had spent years pretending did not exist. The money was nearly gone. The patience of the courts was gone, and the man who believed consequences were for other people suddenly found them waiting directly in front of him. He had failed to pay child support. A judge studied the defendant standing in that courtroom, 31 years old, capable, educated, and stubbornly unemployed. To the court, Smith did not look unlucky, he looked unwilling. So the choice was made brutally simple: serve your country or serve time. There was no patriotic awakening, no swelling music, no speech about duty. Maynard Smith chose the military because it beat a jail cell. On August 31st, 1942, he enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces. and in a twist of fate almost too sharp to be believed, the branch he entered was desperate, burning through young men faster than training camps could replace them. Bombers over Europe were taking savage losses, crews vanished daily into flak bursts and fighter attacks, vacancies opened faster than they could be filled. One position in particular was always empty: aerial gunner. The men who stood in thin aluminum aircraft and fired .50 caliber machine guns at swarming interceptors had one of the most lethal jobs in the entire war. Life expectancy could be measured in missions, sometimes in minutes, but the job came with a benefit: automatic promotion to non-commissioned officer, better pay, a little more status. For a man who needed money, it was attractive. Smith volunteered, not for glory, for the paycheck. He passed through gunnery school, learned how to clear jams, track fighters, conserve ammunition. Instructors noted his competence in the mechanics of the job, but the same personality followed him like a shadow: argumentative, sure of himself, unmoved by criticism. Then came orders for overseas, England. He would join the 8th Air Force, where daylight bombing meant running a gauntlet of anti-aircraft guns and German fighters every time wheels left the runway. For many men, arriving in England felt like stepping onto history's front line. For Maynard Smith, it was simply the next place he had to be. But he was about to learn something the judge already understood. Sooner or later, everyone meets the moment when excuses run out. And in the skies over Europe, that meeting tended to be violent. Thurley, Bedfordshire. A sprawl of runways carved into green English countryside, alive with the thunder of engines and the tension of men who understood the arithmetic of survival. Take off enough times, and eventually the numbers caught up with you. Replacement gunners arrived constantly, some lasted weeks, some days. Most crews, already thinned by casualties, were desperate for fresh bodies. Just not this one. Within days of reaching the base, Staff Sergeant Maynard Smith had managed something remarkable. He made himself unwelcome almost everywhere he went. He corrected veterans who had flown more missions than he'd been in the country. He argued with superiors. He carried himself like a man certain he was the smartest person in any room. Combat units had a finely tuned sense for personality. Trust meant everything at 25,000 feet. Annoy the wrong men, and you didn't just lose friends, you lost a seat on an airplane. And so Smith waited. He was 32 years old, older than many of the officers. 5'6", barely 130 pounds, red-eyed, prematurely grey, flat-footed, and, in the opinion of a growing number of airmen, absolutely insufferable. They started calling him Snuffy. The name came from a comic strip character, lazy, mule-headed, living life on his own terms. The joke stuck because it felt true. Here's how bad it became. In the 8th Air Force, crews usually snapped up replacements immediately. Losses were relentless. Every mission left empty bunks. But for 6 long weeks, while others climbed aboard bombers and vanished toward France, Snuffy remained on the ground. Men preferred to fly short-handed. Think about that. They would rather face German fighters missing a gun than share oxygen with Maynard Smith. War, however, is not sentimental. Eventually, mathematics wins. At the end of April, the operations board filled again with chalked letters and target maps. Crews gathered, scanning the names, tracing routes with nervous fingers. Someone somewhere needed a gunner, and at last a space opened that even Snuffy Smith could fill. The target waiting on the board carried a reputation that needed no explanation: Saint-Nazaire, a port on the French coast bristling with guns wrapped in smoke and armoured in concrete so thick that airmen swore bombs simply bounced. The German submarine pens there sheltered the U-boats strangling Allied shipping, and every attempt to damage them had been paid for in blood. Crews had a nickname for the place: Flak City. Staff Sergeant Maynard Snuffy Smith read his assignment in silence. Ball turret gunner. Aircraft a B-17F. Pilot, First Lieutenant Lewis P. Johnson. Johnson was finishing his tour. This would be his 25th mission. One more trip across the Channel, and he would go home. The rest of the men aboard were experienced as well. They had flown together, fought together, survived together. Smith was the stranger, the rookie. At 0300 on May 1st, the barracks lights snapped on. Boots hit floors, coffee steamed in tin cups while intelligence officers described the defences, the fighter bases, the expected losses. Outside, drizzle crawled across the airfield and low clouds swallowed the morning. Despite the weather, the mission stood. 78 flying fortresses would go. They would cross the channel, strike the pens, and come back. At least that was the promise. Before takeoff, Snuffy climbed down into the belly of the bomber and folded himself into the Sperry ball turret, one of the most feared positions in any aircraft. A glass sphere hung beneath the fuselage like a dropped marble. Inside, the gunner curled into himself, knees tight to chest, surrounded by ammunition cans and the cold arch of the guns. The view was endless. So was the vulnerability. There was nothing between him and 20,000 feet but plexiglass. For men of small build, it was the only place they could fit. For a man like Smith, it might as well have been designed to specification. Engines roared. The runway fell away. England slipped behind them. They droned toward France, in tight formation, silver shapes threading through cloud. Over Saint-Nazaire, something unexpected happened. Very little. Resistance was lighter than feared. Bombs tumbled away toward the concrete pens, and the formation wheeled for home with a sense dangerous, premature, that perhaps they had been granted an easier day. Hours passed, fuel burned down, men relaxed, just slightly. Below the cloud deck, a coastline appeared. Home, or so they thought. The lead navigator had made a mistake. Hidden by weather, the land beneath them was not England at all. It was still occupied France. Brest, another fortress of guns waiting patiently for exactly this opportunity. The formation began to descend. 2,000 feet, almost safe. That was when the sky erupted. Black bursts of anti-aircraft fire ripped upward. Shells cracked through aluminum. Sirens wailed in German fighter bases as interceptors clawed into the air. Within moments, American bombers were twisting, braking, burning, and Lieutenant Johnson's aircraft would receive more than its share. The first hits felt like someone kicking the airplane with a giant boot. Then the kicking turned into tearing. 20mm cannon shells smashed through the fuselage, shredding metal, rupturing lines, slicing cables that had once carried life through the bomber's body. Fuel sprayed, sparks followed, a flash, then a furnace. Fire exploded in the radio compartment and raced aft toward the waist like it had been waiting for permission. Up in the cockpit, Lieutenant Johnson fought the controls as warning lights died one by one. Oxygen gone, hydraulics failing, instruments flickering into uselessness. Behind them, no one could reach the pilots. The flames had built a wall. Down in the ball turret, Snuffy felt the aircraft shudder, and then something worse. The electric whine that powered his guns went silent. He moved the handles. Nothing. The turret was dead. He was hanging in a glass bubble beneath a bomber that was coming apart, unable to turn his guns, unable to fight, exposed to every fighter in the sky. If he stayed, he would burn. Smith cranked the hatch, forced it open, and dragged himself upward into the fuselage. He climbed into a nightmare. Smoke rolled in suffocating waves. Ammunition detonated with flat, vicious cracks. The radio room was already lost, a rectangle of white heat. Flames licked along the catwalk toward the fuel tanks. Men were shouting. 3 of them made a decision in those terrible seconds. Technical Sergeant Henry Bean, Staff Sergeant Robert Folliard, and Staff Sergeant Joseph Bukacek. They jumped. Parachutes opened below, tiny white flowers against the grey channel. No one would ever see them again. Near the tail, Sergeant Roy Gibson lay where he had fallen, badly hit, blood soaking into his gear. He tried to move and couldn't. Forward of the Inferno, Johnson and his co-pilot, Lieutenant Robert McCullum, remained prisoners in the cockpit, blind to what was happening behind them. For all they knew, the rest of the crew might already be gone. And in the center of the burning bomber stood the one man who for 6 weeks nobody had wanted to fly with. Maynard Snuffy Smith. Fire on one side, open sky on the other, a wounded man at his feet, and German fighters already turning back for another pass. What he did next would defy every expectation anyone had ever formed about him. Snuffy Smith did not run, he went to work. Snuffy dropped beside the tail gunner first. Roy Gibson's wounds were ugly, bleeding hard, the kind that could empty a man in minutes if no one stopped it. Smoke swirled around them, thick and greasy, stealing breath with every second. Somewhere behind, ammunition kept exploding like thrown gravel. Smith worked anyway. Bandage, pressure, tie it off. Say something steady, even if you don't feel it. He did everything he could to anchor Gibson to the world. Then he stood and turned toward the greater threat. The fire. It was crawling forward, licking along the interior skin of the bomber toward the fuel tanks. If it reached them, the aircraft wouldn't crash, it would vanish. Snuffy grabbed a fire extinguisher and plunged into the heat. White spray swallowed orange flame. For a moment it seemed to help. Then the extinguisher coughed empty, and the fire pushed back, angry and alive. He found another, emptied that one too. Still the blaze crept onward. And then the fighters arrived. Fraut 190 slid into view, sleek and predatory, seeing what every pilot hunted for, a crippled bomber lagging behind formation. Easy prey. Snuffy was the only man left who could shoot. He ran to the left waist gun and opened up, the browning hammering in his hands, tracers reaching across the sky. When the fighter broke away, he sprinted across the fuselage to the right gun and fired from there. Then back to the flames, then back to Gibson, then back to the guns again. For an hour and a half, Maynard Smith fought 3 battles at once, against the enemy outside, against the fire inside, and against death creeping through the body of the wounded man beside him. The temperature became unbearable, sweat poured into his eyes. The air tasted like gasoline and copper. Spare ammunition began detonating in its boxes, shards whining through the aircraft. Snuffy started throwing them out. Anything loose, anything burning, anything that might ignite something worse. He hurled it through holes ripped in the fuselage. Every pound gone made the bomber lighter, gave the pilots a fraction more chance. When the extinguishers were spent, he wrapped himself in whatever protection he could find and beat at the flames with rags, with blankets, with his gloves. When even that failed, he used the last tool available to him, whatever it took. Up front, Lieutenant Johnson had no picture of the chaos. He only knew a miracle was occurring. The bomber was still flying. Controls sluggish, cables partly severed, systems dying, but somehow the aircraft remained in the air. He pointed the nose toward the channel and prayed the wings would hold. Minutes stretched like hours. Behind him, Snuffy kept moving. Gun fire, Gibson, gun again, refused to quit, refused to die. At last, through smoke and pain and exhaustion, a change in the light. The coastline. England. Johnson spotted an airfield, Perranporth, on the southwestern edge of Cornwall, and brought the battered fortress in as gently as a man could land something already half destroyed. The wheels touched. For a heartbeat it seemed they had made it. Then the airplane gave up. The fuselage, eaten from within and punched full of thousands of holes, split apart on the runway. Metal folded. The aircraft broke in two. Rescue crews raced forward, expecting wreckage and bodies. Instead they found survivors, pilots alive, tail gunner alive, and standing in the debris, blackened with soot, burned, shaking from exhaustion, but still upright, was Staff Sergeant Maynard, Snuffy Smith. Lieutenant Johnson would later put it plainly. One man had brought them home. The story of Snuffy Smith spread like wildfire. A first mission gunner, unwanted, inexperienced, had just saved a plane, a crew, and a mission that seemed doomed. Over 3,500 bullet holes and shrapnel hits riddled the B-17, yet every man aboard survived. One ordinary enlisted airman had done the extraordinary. The Army Air Forces saw an opportunity. America needed heroes. And here he was, stubborn, defiant, impossible, yet heroic beyond measure. On July 15, 1943, Secretary of War Henry Louis Stimson flew to England to personally award the Medal of Honor to Staff Sergeant Maynard Harrison Smith, the first enlisted airman in history to receive it in the European theatre. A ceremony was arranged, press photographers waited, cameras clicked. The world expected a hero, but there was one problem. They could not find him. Officers searched barracks, mess halls, flight lines. He was nowhere. Panic rippled through the organizers. And then someone remembered to check the kitchen. There he was, standing over a pile of potatoes, peeler in hand. Kitchen patrol, military punishment for showing up late from a pass. Heroism and discipline rarely mix. Snuffy Smith had just pulled off one of the most legendary feats of aerial warfare, and 2 months later he was still grounded in the mundane. He had earned the nation's highest honor and yet remained in almost every moment of his life the same insufferable troublemaker he had always been. They pulled him from the kitchen, washed off the soot, dressed him in uniform, and placed the medal around his neck. Cameras flashed, and reporters like a young Andy Rooney chronicled the improbable bravery of the man who refused to quit when the odds were impossible. America loved him. His story became a symbol. Courage does not require perfection, and greatness can arrive from the most unlikely corners. But life at RAF Thurley was more complicated. Even after receiving the Medal of Honor, Smith flew 4 more combat missions. The strain was immense. He was diagnosed with operational exhaustion, what we now call combat stress or PTSD. Even heroes are human. And yet Snuffy Smith's personality, stubborn, defiant, unrepentant, returned as always. He wore his medal proudly, using it to avoid duties, sleep in and bend rules. The same man who saved lives in a burning bomber continued to be a headache to the command. Even heroes have limits. By December 17, 1944, Maynard Smith's disregard for authority caught up with him. The Army reduced him from Staff Sergeant back to private, an almost unheard-of move for a Medal of Honor recipient. Yet the world outside still saw a hero. When he returned to his hometown in 1945, a parade awaited. Speeches, flags, applause. Snuffy Smith was a legend. Post-war life, however, was turbulent. Legal troubles, business ventures that failed, another marriage, this time to Mary Renner, a British USO volunteer he had met in England. 4 children, jobs at the Treasury Department, a magazine venture. Nothing stuck. He never quite settled, yet never denied what he had done on May 1st, 1943. If anything, he embraced it, sometimes embellishing, always proud. The moment of heroism over the Channel remains staggering. For 90 minutes, Snuffy Smith fought flames racing toward fuel tanks, administered first aid to a critically wounded crewman, operated both waist guns to fend off attacking fighters, threw exploding ammunition from the burning fuselage, removed burning debris, used fire extinguishers, blankets, clothing, even his own urine to stop the fire. All this on his first combat mission, surrounded by death, chaos, and enemy fire. The B-17 landed shattered in 2 on the runway, yet all remaining crew survived. Maynard Snuffy Smith, a man no one wanted to fly with, had become something greater than his flaws. He died on May 11, 1984, in St. Petersburg, Florida, aged 72, buried in Arlington National Cemetery. He rests among presidents, generals, and heroes. His life was messy, defiant, sometimes infuriating. But heroism is not about perfection. It is about what you do when the world is collapsing around you. On May 1, 1943, when fire, German fighters, and death threatened every man aboard that B-17, Snuffy Smith acted. For 90 minutes over the English Channel, a man the world doubted became exactly what the moment demanded, and when the Secretary of War arrived to honor him, he was in the kitchen peeling potatoes, the hero nobody liked, the legend everyone remembers, the impossible man who saved lives and became immortal in history. Don't forget to subscribe.